The protagonist begins by talking about the old walls of that place and the worn-out furniture. Some small insects pass by the fans. He invited those insects. He kills one and licks it, saying it's somewhat bitter. However, he spent his entire life in that basement. While writing, he says that when he manages to get out of this suffocating place, he will use these reflections he's writing now. Normally in letters like this, people start by writing their name. However, he has never been called by the name he has, so he doesn't know what it is, but he is sure he must have one given by his mother. He was separated from her right after birth. However, he has this photo in his room of his mother holding him. Looking at her smile, he says he is sure she must have loved him. She is dead, that's what a guy with glasses says next to him. When the guy goes to repeat himself, he turns asking what he means by that. The guy with a sack-like chin says she died shortly after he was born, jumping off a bridge. The man keeps laughing while the protagonist does not react. This guy is actually his father, the cursed bastard who trapped him in this place. The man's plan is to never let him escape. The place is composed of several corridors and many doors, and all the keys to that place are at his waist. The father tells him not to worry, that he will never see the outside. He asks if he doesn't remember why his mother jumped off the bridge. The boy does not respond, and the man takes a cookie and moves it towards his face, saying she was scared. The world she lived in, or this land, she knew an apocalypse was coming. The boy continues to stare at his father, who warns that the reason he won't leave there is because he loves him. He doesn't want to see his son take his own life. The boy says it's a lie, it's impossible, she preferred to die than live in this so-called apocalypse. He tells him to stop lying about this apocalypse coming. The father says he can choose whether to believe it or not. He takes the notebook and warns that this letter he wrote will never see the light of day. The boy tells him to stop, but the father sets it on fire. Sometime later, on top of the trash can, he says that this guy doesn't even deserve to be called a father. However, the guy smiles, saying that he can't say something like that since everything he's been doing is for his son. He warns that the time has come and tells him to follow. Walking through the corridors, the protagonist says it's at the same time every day. They pass through this place and he doesn't hear the sound of any other form of life. He and his father are the only inhabitants of this vast basement. The father starts writing things on the blackboard while the boy thinks it's the same routine every day, the same lessons and the same training. The only thing that keeps him surviving this tedious life is the little free time he gets every day to take a look at the library. Among the numerous books there, the ones he likes the most are those that have descriptions of the world outside. He wonders what this sunlight that all the books talk about is like. At least he believes it must be warmer than the light in that basement. He looks back and sees a field. With this, he imagines himself running in it, saying he wants to experience a peaceful day in life and see a beautiful scenery. He wants to be able to talk to other people and maybe even be friends with them. But the most important thing now is to escape from this place and give his father a good kick. The father closes the book and says he has already told him that he can only read it during his free time. Watching him, he says it looks like his son was reading a book about the surface and says he continues to be pathetic. Wanting to know if he still has some kind of connection to the outside world, the father reminds him that he will never leave this place. When the apocalypse comes, the world will be covered in blood and screams. Only ashes will remain, and this place is the only way to survive. The protagonist says that his father is lying again. He always says that an apocalypse is coming, and it's because of this absurd reason that he has been trapped there his whole life. He wants to escape from this place, no matter the cost. However, the time has not come yet. He has to wait for the perfect moment, the time when his father lets his guard down and becomes defenseless. Sometime later, in one of the other rooms, the protagonist is doing push-ups, struggling. The father says it's ridiculous. He's tired just because of this, and he wouldn't survive the apocalypse like this, saying it's ridiculous that he only did 10 with that small weight on his back. The protagonist's arm loses strength, and he falls to the ground. The father approaches and offers his hand to help. He stays silent for a second, confused. Awkwardly, he asks his father why he is being helped. However, as soon as he takes his hand, the father pulls him and says he never said he would help. He sweeps his legs, making the boy roll and hit his back against the glass. The father explains once again that anyone who reaches out a hand to help cannot be trusted. In the apocalypse, humans are the most dangerous things, and that's why he's been training him and teaching him combat techniques. It will be inevitable that he encounters other humans, and when that happens, he must be strong enough to win with clean hands. However, he realizes that his son has fainted and turns away, saying the day is over. But at that moment, the protagonist finds a chance. His father was careless. He got up and grabbed a shard of glass. That was the moment he had always been looking for. His father's guard was down, and he prepared and lunged towards him. He was going to finish him off now in this careless state, obtain the key, and escape from this place. The boy approached and smiled, saying the plan worked. It was just that piece of glass touching his father, and he was about to reach it. However, there was a flaw in his plan. The father remained still, and he knew that man was not someone who would let his guard down like that. At the moment the shard was about to touch him, the father suddenly turned around. The protagonist was startled, and his father's entire body had already turned. Even so, he didn't hesitate and went for the attack, but the father easily dodged. The plan had failed. The father spun around and kicked him in the face. With that, the protagonist blacked out. Sometime later, he woke up in his room. Before he could say anything, the father said he finally woke up and noted that it was a great attempt. That attack had been very good. However, he had already warned him that he shouldn't be using any weapons, or the training meant nothing. And the penalty for trying to use that would be double training for now. He closed the room door and told him to rest because tomorrow would be a very tough day. With that, the father left. And the protagonist says there is something his father doesn't know. As soon as he turns off the light, the electricity in the room is cut for a few seconds. At that moment, if he focuses his hearing, he can hear things he had never heard before, things that are extremely distant. The sound of things spinning, the sound of birds singing, even a bustling city. Because of this, he discovered two truths. The father says it's time to sleep, but in reality, it's daytime outside. And the other truth is that the world is completely peaceful. The father traps him there because of the so-called apocalypse, but he will break free from it, no matter what happens, and thus find his mother. Every time he asks his father about her, he says she is dead. However, he already knows that his father always lies. This means that in reality, she is alive. He lies down, saying that one day he will escape from there and find her, no matter what happens. The father was walking through the corridors, laughing like a madman alone, until suddenly he received a call. His expression changed and he answered, saying that he had told them not to call unless it was an emergency. While the protagonist slept, he heard something. The call seemed to be serious and he said that it was fine, he would let him live. With that, the phone fell to the ground and the father knelt down crying. After a while, he started laughing while the protagonist was waking up. The father seemed out of his mind, laughing like a lunatic in the corner of the room. The protagonist felt that something was wrong and asked what it was. That was when he noticed he was tied to a chair. He asked what his father was doing and told him to untie him. However, he soon realized that his father didn't seem to be listening. He knew he would have to free himself from those ropes slowly. He started rubbing them together, applying pressure, and they began to break. He was confident until his father appeared in front of him and told him to stop that. The protagonist felt something strange, swallowed hard, and asked his father when they were going to start the supposed training that would be twice as hard. The father only said that plans had changed, and they wouldn't be doing any of that today. In fact, they wouldn't be doing anything anymore, and the boy would just stay in that chair. The protagonist asked what he was talking about, reminding him that he said he was being trained for the apocalypse. The father said the training was over. Now the boy had no idea why his father had changed so much, and the worst part was that he couldn't fight back if he was tied up. He started to wonder if he would really be unable to see his mother. Angrily, he resumed forcing the ropes, and the father asked what he thought he was doing. He ignored him and continued applying pressure, and the ropes began to break. The father approached, almost slack-jawed, and started laughing in his face, seeming to have transformed. Suddenly, he felt something hit him in the face. The chair fell, and the father lifted him up again, warning him not to move. The protagonist hesitated for a second, and then began to move again, taking another blow to the chest and falling to the ground. Despite having nothing to do, he kept forcing the ropes to try to free himself. The protagonist kept insisting. At that time, he didn't know what was happening to him. Maybe it would have made more sense to just agree with his father and look for another opportunity to escape. However, at that moment, there was something he didn't want to lose, even if it cost him his life: the resentment he had for his father for being trapped there. Sometime later, he broke free from the chains. Seeing that he was free made him excited. He wanted to see the look of disappointment on his father's face for not obeying. However, as soon as he turned, his father was coming again. He imagined his father would have a look of rage, but as he got closer, he noticed something was different. What he saw in front of him were tears that his father had always been holding back. It was then that he realized that this man had always been extremely sad. This made him wonder why this damned man had such an expression at that moment. With that, he was struck and lost consciousness, with his father saying he hoped he understood. The lessons were always the same. His father talked about the rules for surviving the apocalypse, and the most important one was never to leave the basement. There would be no safer place in the world than that. Defense mechanisms that would be maintained for 126 years, resources, and supplies enough for anyone to stay alive. That place had everything prepared, and leaving it was asking to die. The father warned that the end would come without any warning, so he was not to leave. The protagonist woke up face down on the floor. When he regained consciousness, his father had disappeared and left him behind. That had never happened before. The only time he didn't see his father was when he slept. However, remembering his father's crying expression, he knew something was happening. He had become accustomed to the repetitive days in that place, but that day was different from all the others in his life. He instinctively knew that something was about to begin. As if his intuition could be heard, the doors to all the rooms opened at that moment. The boy didn't hesitate for a second. As soon as the doors opened, he saw an opportunity for the first time in his life. He went through the doors and started advancing through the corridors. In a certain area, he knew that if his father were there, he would have been stopped. But this confirmed that his father was not there. All the barriers were deactivated, so he ran until he found the staircase. He knew that was what he had been looking for and started to escape, hoping that the light beyond that hatch would be sunlight. As soon as he pushed the hatch aside, he was blinded by something. He climbed out of the hole and slowly stood up. He tried to open his eyes and found himself in the middle of a bustling city. The place was lively and all the people seemed to be living their everyday lives. The protagonist told himself that he had finally managed to escape from there. He stood still and a bald man asked what he was doing in the middle of the street. He turned around excitedly, saying he had finally found a person. The man was confused by this crazy boy. But then the protagonist stopped to think that it was not the time to focus on that. It was too early to let his guard down, and his father might realize he had escaped. He started running, saying he should distance himself as much as possible from that basement. As he ran, he smiled, thinking that the moment he had been dreaming of had finally arrived. For the first time, he was free. Not long ago, escaping seemed impossible, so he never imagined that the doors would simply open. But then he stopped running and asked himself, why did the doors open? It was impossible for it to be a system malfunction. His father was extremely meticulous and would never make such a mistake. That's when he wondered, what if the opening of the door was intentional? He shook his head, saying no, something like that was impossible, especially since his father was the one who made the rule never to leave that place. He looked around, saw people talking, school children laughing, and a little boy going to get a balloon. He saw the excited boy and his smiling family. The children were running and he felt happy, thinking that it was all right. The boy bumped into someone and the balloon rose. While the protagonist thought that in the end everything his father said was a lie, he realized how peaceful it was outside. This was how life outside the basement was. Everyone there was living a calm life, just as he had hoped. The balloon floated towards the sun. While he thought that an approaching apocalypse made no sense, people were calm. Then everyone felt something strange, and he remembered that his father always said that the end would come without any warning. Suddenly, all the birds in the city began to flee. People looked up confused. The entire city was under a shadow, and behind the balloon, another planet was visible. It covered the sun while everyone looked up confused. Something started to come out of that planet, almost like a virus searching for a host. From the sky, it headed toward the earth. People on the ground said that it seemed to be getting closer. No one had any idea what it was, and someone asked if it might be the moon. The protagonist said it was ridiculous to call it the moon and asked if they weren't seeing what he was seeing. Amidst the advance of that planet, a creature was visible. The protagonist was paralyzed. Besides that creature, there were countless others connected to it. The tangled mass of monsters formed tentacles. They continued advancing, linking with each other until they reached the middle of the city. Never leave the basement. His father always said that was the basic rule of survival. However, there was an exception. If the location of that place was exposed to the enemy, the first creature strangely dove straight into that sewer. The father scratched out the first rule, saying that in the face of great danger, it no longer applied. The security system showed that the doors would be closed as all the creatures ran through the corridors. Outside, the population didn't understand what was happening. An infinite tangle of creatures reached the ground. It all happened so suddenly that no one even reacted. In a second, a blonde guy was grabbed and pulled by one of the creatures. Before he could react, he found himself face to face with the monster's mouth. People just watched as the guy's remains fell in front of everyone. With that, they started screaming and everyone tried to flee. A boy was walking by with headphones on while everyone passed by. He seemed confused and noticed something above him and was immediately crushed. A muscular creature started hurling rocks at everyone, and another with a clawed arm jumped into the crowd, slashing 3 people in one stroke. In that place, no one could escape any of the creatures. The protagonist stood there, not knowing what was happening. People talked about calling the police, but he couldn't react. Then he remembered his father always said that when the apocalypse came, the world would be bathed in blood and the only thing left would be a heap of ashes. The protagonist looked up and saw a creature 3 times taller than a building staring at everyone. The city screamed as one of its steps destroyed half the city. With that, the apocalypse began. The planet in the sky continued to rain creatures upon the earth. Lying on the ground, the protagonist realized that his father had always been right. Then he remembered his father saying that his mother was dead and wondered if he was right about that too. The citizens continued trying to flee from the creatures, but for unprepared humans, it was impossible. Then someone grabbed the protagonist's arm. When he looked, it was his father. He was about to ask how this happened, but his father just told him to keep running. A glance back showed everyone being devoured. He was shocked as his father turned the corner and he followed only to face a horde of creatures again. His father had already pulled him and told him to follow. Strangely, his father was moving against the fleeing crowd. Both were running towards a destroyed bridge. No matter which way he looked, the creatures were devouring people. A man in a cap yelled for them to run faster and a girl seemed confused. Behind them, the mass of creatures continued advancing. Meanwhile, his father and the protagonist were almost at the end of the bridge. The mass of monsters carried everyone who had already died. The protagonist warned his father that they were going to be caught, but his father told him to shut up and run. That was the only way they could get out of the city alive. Under the bridge, the mass of creatures was already absorbing everything. The protagonist looked back and told his father that they were being followed. That's when something stopped him. A creature behind a taxi managed to grab his foot. The monster squeezed and crushed his leg. The protagonist agonized, knowing that if he didn't free himself, he would die. However, his father picked up a rock and smashed the creature with it. The monster fell away and the protagonist cried out in pain. His father glared at him, and just as he was about to say something, they both felt a pressure. The mass of monsters continued advancing. He trembled and started to get up, knowing he had to run to survive. The problem was that he realized little by little that the distance between them and the creatures was decreasing rapidly. He felt a pain in his leg and fell to the ground, realizing that no matter how much he ran, he couldn't escape. His father came and stared at him. The boy told his father to run, saying he wouldn't make it out alive in this state. At least if his father got out, he could survive on his own. His father's foot started to turn away, and the boy thought that was right. He wanted his father to run because he had always been ignored anyway. However, in the midst of it all, his father reached out his hands and asked why he wasn't getting up. The boy was confused and shouted, saying that his father should be running. His father simply said that he would stay alive because he had a plan. The boy was confused and said it was impossible for him to have a plan for this. However, he saw that his father's expression hadn't changed. He paused for a second and remembered his father's expression when he was wrong. He knew that his father really had a plan, so he took his father's hands. His father pulled him up and told him to run. The boy asked his father if he didn't have a plan. That's when he noticed that his father had left something in his hand. His father just said there was no time and that he needed to escape now via the bridge. He started running again, saying he would obey. He weaved between cars and distanced himself. Then he noticed his shadow and looked back. The bridge's support had broken, and everything started to collapse. The passage that connected that side of the city to the other fell into the void. The protagonist wondered what had happened to his father. He stood still for a moment, questioning why this happened now. Remembering that his father said he would survive because he had a plan, he wondered if this was the plan. Now he had no idea why this happened. Why did his father go so far for him but also torture him his whole life? He fell on the bridge, questioning why his father did this in the end. He told himself he survived, but then for what? What was he surviving for? All the life he had been dreaming of on the surface disappeared. The calm life in a peaceful place, and also the sole objective he had been carrying. He begins to cry, saying he wanted to ask. He sees his father and questions why he went so far to save him like this in the end. The father says nothing, and he demands his father to tell him what he is going to survive for in this apocalyptic world. He feels a handshake from his parents and turns around. It is then that he remembers the paper in his hand. Slowly, he opens his hand and sees what is there. However, the creature starts climbing the bridge. The protagonist gets startled and turns to run. However, his leg is still hurting and he ends up stopping. He leans on a pillar nearby and the creature trips. With that, the side of the bridge breaks and both fall rolling to the side. The boy slowly tries to get up, but the problem is that this leg can't take any more. The creature raises its head, and he knows there is no way to escape that. He is really going to die like this. However, he sees a light at the end of it all. He believed there was nothing left. However, on the paper in his hand, he saw the message. His mother was alive and wanted to know why he only found out something like this now. The creature gets up, and the protagonist slowly rises. He tells himself that he wants to keep living. He doesn't want to give up and will do everything possible to find his mother. The creature roars and he knows it is not possible to defeat it. However, he remembers his father saying that when the apocalypse began, humans wouldn't be able to survive. That's because they don't have enough power or knowledge to continue existing individually. And even if they get lucky in the first few days, eventually with the daily dangers, everyone will die. The creature advances and the protagonist doesn't know what to do. In the conversation, he asked his father what he was going to do then and how he was going to survive. If what he is saying is true, does that mean there's nothing he will do and he just has to accept death? The monster is about to land a punch on him when his father asks if he has forgotten everything he has learned. With that, he remembers all the training he has been doing. With that, he manages to dodge the punch at the last moment. The creature ends up on the other side and the protagonist can't believe he dodged. The monster comes again and gets scared. However, the father had already warned him that he was different from any ordinary human. The biggest difference between them and others was that he knew how to survive. With that, the protagonist focuses. The creature comes running and the father says that everything he has been learning until now, with all the training experience and all the survival wisdom, he will have to use it to do whatever it takes to survive. He dodges the creature's attack by jumping, grabs the staff on his back, and hits it on the neck. The entire city is destroyed, and amidst a heap of rubble, the only survivors wonder where the police are. Some comment that they are lucky to at least be alive. The problem is that it's only been 4 days and they are already running out of supplies. The girl tells the guy next to her that if they keep waiting, the police will show up soon, until a guy comes and says she is making everyone uncomfortable. She apologizes and says she's not talking loudly. The guy puts his hand on his face, saying it's not about that. She's talking to her dead husband. He then says to let it go because he's about to lose his mind. A girl then calls for him, and they talk about having looked for food in a certain region and found nothing. The guy says that even so, they will have to find something if they want to stay alive. She then says there is a place she hasn't looked at yet and asks no one to give up. The guy smiles and thanks her. She feels a bit embarrassed, and the guy says that everyone is exhausted from having to run from the creatures. However, she still wants to help everyone and says she's a good girl. She says she's not that good and says it's okay. However, the excited guy responds that everyone will make it out alive. She stands still, not knowing what to say, and after a while, she goes to talk to other people. She asks a redhead if they found food, and they look at each other. With that, she pulls out a piece of bread from the side and says they found this. The girl smiles, but when the woman opens it, she is confused and the two have already eaten. The blonde asks what they are doing since everyone said they would share. However, the redhead says she never agreed with that and it was something the others said. The blonde points out that they ate some of the shared food yesterday. The chubby-haired guy says he doesn't even remember that. The girl then warns that it's okay. She will report the two of them to everyone. The guy immediately stands up and asks why she doesn't try to do that. However, she will soon find out what will happen. The girl says it doesn't matter because she can run very fast. The guy laughs and approaches when suddenly a scream echoes. Everyone trembles and he asks his friend if it wasn't a creature. She turns around and says yes, but it came from far away, so they are fine. With that, he feels relieved and says it seems he was scared for nothing. However, looking to the side, he sees the girl covering her ears and trembling. He laughs, asking where her confidence went. How was she going to run if she was trembling so much? Then the girl notices something. There's a piece of bread in a corner. A while later, that guy from before says hi to her and asks if she looked around there. She says yes, and he asks if she found anything. With the bread in her pocket, she says she unfortunately didn't find anything. The guy says that's okay, but it's no surprise. Because for now, the most important thing is to stay alive since you can always look for food. Suddenly, the monster breaks through the wall behind them. The girl is thrown, and as she starts to get up, she sees the creature right behind the guy. He raises his hands, pleading for help, but she runs off, apologizing. He screams, asking why, and she says she never claimed to be a good person. With that, the previous couple also flees, and the guy tells her not to look back. Looking ahead, he sees the girl and a creature. The redhead says that when the girl gets eaten, they should take advantage of it to get past. While thinking she was an idiot for going against the beast, the monster raises its arm and attacks her. At that moment, the girl realizes something and jumps, dodging the attacks. They slip while dodging and manage to reach the other side. They can only watch her get further away while the monster comes from behind. They scream, and a while later, the girl falls to the ground, wondering if she's finally safe. That's when she notices something beside her. The protagonist is there, standing and sleeping. She slaps him and he falls to the ground, continuing to snore. At that moment, she notices that he is alive, but on the other side of the pillar, a creature is approaching. She wonders if the beast heard them as the creature slowly passes by. She realizes the protagonist is exposed and pulls him by his shirt. The monster passes while he is still asleep. Once the monster is gone, she relaxes, finally having survived. Then she notices he is looking at her. She jumps back and he leaps to the other side, asking who she is and what she was trying to do. The girl is a bit confused, and the protagonist remembers that his father told him never to trust anyone. The only way to survive was by keeping others at a distance. The girl explains that she only hit him so the monster wouldn't see him. However, he keeps remembering his father saying not to trust anyone or he will be used and killed. Now he knows that if his father was right, he won't survive by getting close to people. He then asks how he could believe her. At that moment, his stomach growls and he collapses from hunger. The last time he ate was 5 days ago in the basement. He is already at his limit, and even with long breaks, he now has no energy left. The girl says she doesn't have anything to eat. He is confused and asks what she is talking about since he didn't even ask. She says he just looked hungry, so she assumed. However, when she goes to apologize, the bread falls out of her pocket. As soon as he sees it, he asks what it is. She is unsure how to respond, and the protagonist has no idea what that item is. Yet strangely, his hunger seems to intensify when he looks at it. He asks if it's food, and she says no. He then remarks that he must have been wrong, and she retorts that it's ridiculous to think it's food. The girl thinks she has found the biggest idiot of all, who can't even recognize food. Unfortunately for her, the protagonist doesn't trust humans. She is puzzled, and he says he will never be fooled by a human's lies. She realizes she's dealing with an even bigger fool than she thought. The protagonist is sure from her reaction that it's food and that he needs it. If she doesn't want to cooperate, you will have to use force. However, she offers him a piece, saying she won't give more than half. The protagonist is confused, wondering why she's sharing that reduces her chances of survival. She says he will have to repay her 4 times over. The boy realizes that these were her motives. Humans are indeed treacherous creatures. He stands up and she asks where he is going. He says now that he's eaten, he's moving on human. She runs after him, asking where he thinks he's going in such a world, and says she knows the place well because she grew up there. The protagonist turns and asks if she really knows the place. She says yes, and so he asks if she knows where the subway is. Later, hiding in the city, she wonders why she's following this idiot. If she had known he was like this, she wouldn't have shared the bread with him. However, she remembers asking why he wanted to go to the subway. He said it was safe there, and she questioned why. He said it had a concentration of resources they would need to survive, and most importantly, it was hard for the monsters to detect humans underground. The girl thinks he's strange but talks as if he knows something, not to mention that this crazy person didn't even know what bread was. Then she realizes they've arrived but says she was sure it was around here. The protagonist tells her to stop lying as he knows subways are underground. She then says this isn't the subway but the entrance to the place. At that moment, an old man approaches and tells her to be quiet. He says he came because he heard something but didn't expect to find people. The protagonist asks who the man is. The man responds that his words are a bit rude and leaves introductions for later, telling them to follow him. The The blonde asks where, and he asks if it isn't what they are looking for. After walking through some rubble, he says they've arrived. The protagonist sees the subway and it's busy. The blonde says there are many people there, and she didn't expect everyone to have had the same idea. The man comments that he can't forget that moment. When the creatures were everywhere, he started running and happened to find this place by luck. He says he walked on the surface a few times in search of medicine, but the two of them are the first people he's encountered. The protagonist observes everyone. His plan was to establish a base there, but there are far more people than he expected. He can see all kinds of people there. Those who are lost and trapped in despair, those who show their cruel side, and the strangest of all, one who stands still without any apparent intention. He knows that the more humans there are, the more risk factors exist. However, none of the people he observed in the subway seem to pose a danger. He can instinctively recognize who is dangerous, just like the monsters on the surface and his father. But none of the people here give him any sense of danger. Maybe he should stay there for a while since no one can hurt him. The bully clears his throat and introduces himself. His name is Kwon Byung, and he is a doctor. He was looking for medication, and that's how he found them. He waits for them to introduce themselves, but the protagonist says nothing. The girl then says she will introduce herself and says her name is Haru. The man says that from her uniform, she seems to be from the elementary school called Virtual. She says yes and asks if he knew it. The old man says he did because the hospital was near the mall next to it. Haru seems confused about not remembering a hospital there. He asks the same of the protagonist, but noticing his clothes says he spoke something stupid and asks for his name. The protagonist stops to think and says he has no name. The old man is confused, and the protagonist says he was never given a name. The old man becomes pensive and says that when he feels more comfortable, he can share it. At that moment, a redhead comes and calling for him, saying things are getting worse. They approach a guy with some bandages on the floor. Trembling, he calls for the doctor, who looks at the wound and says it's worse than he imagined. He stopped the bleeding last time, but it wasn't enough. He tells the guy that if he doesn't undergo surgery, he has a high chance of dying from an infection. He opens his coat full of items and says they will have to disinfect it. The protagonist watches. He remembers reading once about doctors and something his father doesn't even know he knows. The job of treating humans for a price. However, money is useless in this apocalypse. So he asks the old man what he will receive for this treatment. Everyone looks back and the man seems a bit confused. The doctor then asks why he would have to receive anything. He is a doctor, and his job is to take care of those who are injured. He tells the guy not to worry as he rarely fails his surgery. The man hugs him, grateful for the help. The protagonist can't understand why the guy is helping without expecting anything in return. He wonders if the doctor is stupid or if this behavior is normal for humans. The doctor tells him to be careful as his wound is getting worse. The man thanks him, but then he notices something. The guy is actually a veterinarian. The doctor starts the procedure while the man is still in shock. The boy asks him to make a knot, but the doctor says it's not possible as things could worsen if the man moves during the surgery. The man screams that he is a veterinarian and asks if he really knows how to perform surgery on a human. The old man, smiling, says yes because humans are also animals. The man starts shouting, saying he doesn't want this surgery anymore. The doctor then asks for some anesthetics, but the red-haired girl says they don't have any. He says he found one, grabs a block, and hits the guy on the head. With that, the protagonist is certain that humans are dangerous. A while later, he's in the corner of the room saying he finally found some silence. The best option was to leave that place instead of watching that scene. Leaning against the wall, he wonders what he will do now. The only thing he has is a photo of his father gave him and a message saying his mother is alive. Now he has no route since there are no clues on where to go next. However, whenever he looks at the photo, he feels a strange sensation. The plants in the background have shapes similar to those of the aliens. Even in the basement, he found this odd and researched various books on flowers, but never found anything like it. However, if this is a special flower that only grows in certain environments, he might find the place where it was taken. If that's the case, he first needs to find someone who can identify this flower. A fly passes by and he kills and eats it, saying it's bitter. In another part, some people tell the boss that they have gathered everyone. A scared man turns and says it's time to start. In the middle of the crowd, people wonder why they were all called there. One of them points to someone in the crowd, asking for an explanation. It's the boss, but the man seems unresponsive. He sweats and the other one trembles. The boss says he can look into the depths of the human mind, finding every thought they are trying to hide. And that man's eyes show fear. He hides it, trying to look tough on the outside. The man screams for him not to come closer, but the boss punches him in the stomach, saying fear always reveals itself. The people are scared, and he approaches, grabbing the man by the collar. Seeing his desperate face, he says that's what he wanted, telling him to show more of the true form hidden in his soul. After a while, the man asks him to stop. Then a girl approaches and informs the boss that there are people who are not there. He asks who. She says it's an old man, a boy, a little girl, and another who is injured. The boss says he ordered everyone to be gathered and asks what happened. She explains that it's the Mohawk guy's zone and he never listens to anyone. The boss says he doesn't like being controlled, but will go there to resolve it. As he leaves, she asks what they should do with the guy on the ground. He tells them to tie him up and throw him outside. The people ask for help, but no one seems to respond. The protagonist wakes up, wondering when he fell asleep. He had been on guard against the monsters, unable to rest. However, he notices something. He has no idea where he is. He feels a pain in his head, and when he steps on the ground, his foot seems to sink. He wonders if he is being swallowed by something, or worse, if he is already in his stomach. Something pulls him, and suddenly he wakes up, realizing it was a dream, but it felt too real. He is confused, seeing a crowd in front of him, and asks who they are. The boss says he has 2 minutes to appear at the central station, or he will be expelled from that place. His friends comment that he should go, or he'll be in trouble. The protagonist gets up. The boss looks disappointed. He was curious to see who had the courage to hide, but it seemed foolish. The protagonist stretches his neck and asks how. One of the guys is confused and asks who this lunatic is, but the boss says this is how it's fun and orders the protagonist to look at him because he wants to see his true form, to see what's hidden behind that look. However, he doesn't seem to see anything and is confused. The guy asks the boss what's wrong and tells the protagonist to make the most of the 2 minutes. However, the boy just questions these 2 minutes and says that actually 2 seconds are enough to finish everyone there. The guy falls to his knees, laughing, saying this kid is funny, pulls out a blade, and asks if those are his last words. The boss places his hand on the man's shoulder, and at that moment, the protagonist notices that the photo is not in his pocket. The man asks if he's looking for this. The protagonist warns that if there's a scratch on the photo, he will die. The man is startled, and the boss pulls it from his hand, warning that if the boy takes another step, he will tear it in half. Later, the protagonist is being kicked. The man asks where his confidence went. The protagonist is hating himself for letting the most important thing disappear while he slept. It seems humans are indeed more dangerous than he imagined. The man asks the boss if the boy will be expelled. The boss responds no. When he looked into the boy's eyes, he was different from the rest. His soul was so deep he couldn't see anything. He warns that they will keep an eye on the boy and always keep that photo under supervision. However, he tells his henchmen never to forget to always keep it in hand. Confused, the man asks the boss if they really have to do all this because of this kid. The boss just says it's an order, and the man says he understands. Thinking back to the moment the boy stood up, he was somewhat scared, but now it doesn't matter. He turns to the boy and asks where his smile is. At that moment, Haru appears. She asks what they are doing, and the boss says they found another one. Embarrassed, she asks if they were looking for her. The boss just tells her to go to the central station. As he leaves, a man says he hopes to see the protagonist again and will take good care of the photo. Everyone leaves and Haru approaches the boy. She asks if he's okay, but he slaps her hand away. She asks why he did that and says she was just trying to help. He tells her he doesn't want help and orders the human to get out of his way. She says her name isn't human, it's Haru, and tells him to get it right. He just walks past and asks if he needs to remember something so insignificant. Later, they are side by side with Huang, who asks if there was any problem. Haru says no, it's just that she tried to talk to someone who doesn't even know how to communicate. The protagonist thinks he would never hold a human's hand. He remembers clearly that his father warned him that when someone extends their hand, you can never trust it. Humans are enemies. He knows that the man has the photo and it would be easy to snatch it from his hand by force. Even if he tore it in half, it would still be easy to take it back together. It's just that he doesn't want to ruin it. It's the only item he has from that basement. The boss then says that everyone has arrived, so it's time to start. He announces that the options are to follow him or not. Those who follow him don't need to worry about being expelled like the man who is tied up. He explains that the man caused chaos in the subway, which is the only safe place they have, and that's why he was expelled. He won't force anyone to follow him, but those who do must understand that his word is absolute. At this, several people start to look at each other and walk towards him. The old man notices that many people are abandoning him, even the couple he helps. He knew that those with more strength always dominate the weak, especially in a world where the law has become obsolete. Clearly, the guy isn't going to force anyone, but seeing that other person expelled makes everything clear. Choosing the side of the boss is the best choice for living longer. However, the old man smiles, saying that he has lived a long time, so being unpredictable once in a while isn't such a bad thing. He knows that on the boss's side, he might not even be able to help patients when they really need it. So he will stay here, even if he is alone, but the little girl is beside him. He asks if she is really going to stay with him, warning that it's better for her to go to the other side than stay with just the two of them. But the girl points out that they aren't alone there. There is the protagonist, the hooded guy, and a poor girl sleeping. Soon they will be captured and tortured. Another black-haired girl says they will probably just starve to death or become monster food. She starts screaming in desperation while the old man watches. Then, another little girl bumps into him. A man tells her to be careful and apologizes to the old man. He says it's okay and tells her to listen to her father more. But the girl says something he doesn't understand, and when he gets closer, she headbutts him, saying that man isn't her father and he is somewhere else looking for her. The man with glasses explains that she really isn't his child. He just found her while he was running away, and until he finds her parents, he's acting as her guardian. The protagonist tries to pass through the door, and the guards tell him he can't. The boss ordered that anyone who enters that room will be punished, but the only thing he wants to know is where that bastard with the photo is. The people gathered to divide the food and said those on the other side could only take what was distributed. The girl who was sleeping complained, saying it was too little and the others had received more. The guy said it would be like that from now on because they just stay in that room doing nothing. However, the smell of the food reached a man lying down. He woke up and said that smell was very good. When they finished distributing, they asked about a certain person. The guy asked who, and they mentioned the boss's right-hand man, someone who seems very dangerous. Everyone there calls him the bomb because he doesn't obey the boss and always walks alone. Everyone knows he is the type to kill people with a smile on his face. The man feels cold sweat trickle down as someone runs down the corridor towards him. It's the little girl from before who bumps into him and says he did something wrong. He says it's dangerous for her to run around alone and now his clothes are all dirty. The men serving the rations point and warn that he's coming, already wondering if the next victim is the girl. As he gets closer, the men start spitting bullets. He calls for the man, who asks what's wrong. He says it's nothing serious, just to give some food to that girl. The man is confused and says she already received her share. He then says to give her his portion. Taking his food, he hands it to her. The man is perplexed. Why did he give his food to the girl? Is this some kind of unknown psychological torture? Just then, the bespectacled man comes running, pulls the girl behind him, and tells her to stay there. He asks what the problem is, and the mohawked man asks what their problem is. The man with glasses grabs the little girl and runs off. As she looks back, she sees the blonde man smiling back at her. The people in the room continue to be watched, and the girls comment that it seems more and more people are keeping an eye on them. The protagonist, on the other hand, is wondering if he should just leave and look for that guy. He looks at Haru, remembers the slap, and frowns. The woman seems to notice something, and at night, when everyone is sleeping, the same woman from before gets up and sees the protagonist in the corner. She goes to touch him, and he grabs her arm, asking what she was planning to do. The woman is scared by the boy's strength and says she just wanted to talk. The protagonist seems not to believe her, and she says she came because he doesn't seem to talk to anyone. He stares at her and says it's his problem if he doesn't talk to anyone. The woman is confused, and he slaps her hand away, telling her to stay away. She sits down and after a while asks why he is always distant from everyone. Maybe he's just a very shy boy. He says she's talking nonsense, it's just that he doesn't want to be close to enemies. She questions this and he says every human is always an enemy he can't trust. The woman explains that she doesn't plan to hurt him, but he says he doesn't believe her because she could be lying. She then says that's fine, she just wanted him to reconcile with a girl named Haru. He asks if she's talking about the yellow-haired human and says he never fought with her. The woman then asks if he can get closer to her. The boy says that's another problem. To him, she's a human no different from the others outside the room. The woman says that the girl thinks she's hiding it, but she cries every night. The woman explains to the protagonist that there must be something Haru wants to say, but she doesn't have the courage. Since they are the same age, they might get along well. However, he responds that sadness is something only the weak feel. If you got time for that, you have time to think of another plan to survive. At this point, the woman asks if he has never been sad about losing someone important. He recalls the moment he was separated from his father on the bridge and says no, and it will never happen in the future because he doesn't care about anyone. The woman tells him that not being able to feel sadness because you have no one to lose is called loneliness, but she tells him not to worry because if he dies, she would be sad for him. He is speechless for a second and says she won't be sad because he won't die, and he doesn't care if she dies. She says that's fine, but he is very. The protagonist just thinks she is strange, while the other girl, who is always sleeping, wishes they would shut up. It has been 4 days since he arrived at this subway. He was only there to find a place to rest, but now he's stuck there because of that photo the guy is holding. While being beaten, he asks if the men are having fun. From the back, the guy with the photo says it's not fun. They didn't want to do this. It's just that he needs to be punished for not wanting to leave the room that time. The protagonist says if that's the case, why doesn't he come and punish him himself? The guy is taken aback and realizes the boy isn't scared at all and is staring right at him. Angry, he says the boy deserves to be punished. The protagonist remembers his father once saying that humans are naturally weak, and now he finally understands what he meant. When he returns to the base, everyone is scared and asks if it was the same guys. He walks through thinking at least there aren't only those kinds of humans. The doctor says he doesn't look too bad but suggests disinfecting. The boy says he's fine and sits down. Someone brings his lunch and says they got it because they didn't know when he would return. He starts to thank her but stops mid-sentence. She asks him to repeat, and he says it's nothing. The protagonist thinks about when she said she didn't want to hurt him and that if he died, she would be sad. Maybe it was true. He thought maybe it was okay to trust her a little. Suddenly, she collapses to the ground and he asks what's happening and if she's okay. The doctor puts her on a stretcher and says her symptoms don't look good and she will need medicine. The problem is that they would have to go to the surface because they don't have that kind of medicine here. The woman responds that it's okay, and it doesn't make sense to go up there just for her. However, Wong says that without the medicine, her condition will only get worse. The protagonist asks how. The protagonist asks what the worst outcome would be if they didn't get the medicine. Before the doctor could respond, some men entered saying that the boss was calling for the doctor. At that moment, the man saw the protagonist and felt relieved. He He still didn't understand why he had to keep holding onto this photo every time he saw the boy, especially considering that the boy could easily take him down even without it. He tells the doctor to go quickly because there are injured people in need of treatment. However, the doctor responds that he can't do that right now. The blonde man asks if he's going to disobey the boss's orders, but the doctor explains that it's not what he means. It's just that he needs to take care of her first before he can help the others. The woman stands up and says it's fine. She will go to the surface to try to find the medicine. The doctor says it doesn't make any sense. She won't survive in her current state. The blonde man says he understands the situation and that the doctor should have explained it earlier. With that, he punches her in the stomach, saying that help has arrived. Everyone is shocked, even the protagonist, who is left speechless. Her body falls to the ground, and the doctor approaches as everyone sees her bleeding. The protagonist can't take his eyes off her. He can feel her legs slipping away little by little. He wonders why humans die so easily until he feels something on his leg. Looking down, she asks why he looks so serious. The boy can't say anything, and she reminds him that he said he wouldn't care. With that, her life fades away without him saying a word. Her hand falls to the ground, and everyone falls silent. The blonde man curses, saying his hand got dirty. Wong asks how it's possible that his expression didn't change after killing someone like that, and he remarks that apparently the monsters aren't only on the surface. The blonde man simply replies that he saved the old man because if he followed her to the surface, both would have died. The people around him are angry, and he says they should be grateful for that. But then he looks to the side. The protagonist is standing still, and he asks what's wrong. Is he scared? Where did all that courage go? But at that moment, the protagonist realizes the photo isn't in his hand. The man looks back and says it seems he dropped it when he grabbed the knife. The boy prepares himself, and as the blonde man turns to ask what he's going to do, he sees the boy's stance and asks if he's really going to try. Instinctively, he blinks. In that instant, the protagonist finds his opening. The man is about to ask if he's going to do something when the boy is already in his face saying yes. From the guy's perspective, nothing made sense. He saw the boy, and in the moment he blinked and opened his eyes, he had been struck and the knife had fallen. The two men beside him hadn't reacted, and his body was still in the air. The protagonist grabbed him by the collar and struck him again, sending him spinning across the room. Before he hit the wall, the protagonist advanced again. As soon as the man's head touched the wall, the boy grabbed him by the collar and the knife fell into his hand. Now everyone understood what had happened, and the boy already had the man immobilized. He stared at the guy who hadn't reacted for even an instant. This made him angry, seeing how weak this guy was. When he attacked, the man couldn't react, not even when the punch was about to hit him. If he had known this guy was so weak, he would have just taken the photo from his hand right away. If he had done that, there wouldn't be blood on his leg. At that moment, he saw his father telling him to finish it quickly. He should have no pity for any enemy. The protagonist felt something strange until someone told him to stop. He turned, and Wong said that if he did that, there was no turning back. However, the protagonist simply asked if he was worried about that human's life. The old man said no. He was talking about the boy's life and told him to ask himself if he really needed to go that far as to kill him. The protagonist remembered a time when he asked his father if he really had to kill. If he just hit people enough, they would forget to attack him. His father laughed and said he wouldn't survive thinking that way and asked if he was afraid to kill a human. The boy told him to stop with that because he would never become like his father. Even if the apocalypse came as his father always said, he would live the way he wanted. He wouldn't go around killing people just because he didn't like them. Then he remembered when the man killed the woman and the expression on his face. With that, he dropped the weapon. The doctor said he made the right choice, but the boy replied that it wasn't because of the options. It was because he knew that if he killed this guy, he would become like him. He thought to himself that there was no reason to kill that man, and why should he care if that woman lived or not? Even if she were alive, she wouldn't help him find his mother. So it didn't matter. What he didn't see was that another man was coming to hit him on the back of the head. Confident it would be easy because he didn't have a knife, the man went to strike. But the protagonist simply turned and pulled his friend to defend the attack. With that, he let go of the collar and punched the other man in the face. The body rolled and fell at the feet of the last man, who then crouched down. The boy asked what he thought he was doing. The man grabbed the photo and questioned if it was important to him. However, now the protagonist simply approached and asked what he was going to do. The man stayed quiet, smoothed out the photo, dusted it off, and handed it back to the protagonist, telling him to be more careful. After that, the boy returned to the group. They covered the woman's body, and the doctor asked where the other girl and the child were. The bespectacled man said they had gone to the bathroom and were lucky not to have seen such a thing. Suddenly, someone called the protagonist. A chubby man with a mustache asked why he didn't do anything if he was so strong. The boy replied that it was because they had something important to him. The man asked if he was talking about that piece of paper. The protagonist just said it was important, ignored the man, approached everyone, and said he wanted to ask something. Showing the photo, everyone said they had never seen anything like it. The girl who always sleeps asked where he took that photo, and he replied that if he knew, he wouldn't be asking. The bespectacled man said if they had access to the internet, it would be easy to find out. Huang asked why he wanted to know the location of that place. He said it was obvious. It was because he was going there. Huang, surprised that he noticed the boy knew how to fight, but it was impossible to survive up there. However, the boy responded that he could survive. Everyone was confused while he thought to himself that he didn't expect to find anyone who would recognize anything. Then someone appeared. It was the boss, who said they had apparently reached this point. Seeing the thing in the protagonist's hand, he said the man didn't follow such a simple order. Rolling up his sleeves, he said it didn't matter now. They would have to resolve this in a more intuitive way. Meanwhile, on the surface, a creature was walking and decided to start digging the ground leading directly to the station. In another part, people had improvised something to make a fire. Haru was nearby, just observing until the little girl came out of the bathroom and said everyone there was ridiculous for not flushing. Haru said it was inevitable since the flush didn't work. The man from before approached and said it was better for them to return soon. Haru seemed angry, but the man said he was only doing it to survive too. From a distance, away from the fire, the man asked if they were going to fight. Then something fell into their pot. They went to check, asking what was happening. That's when more rocks started falling. He looked up and saw the ceiling opening. At the same time, the creature was already in his face. Meanwhile, the protagonist was face to face with the boss. He looked to the side and saw the henchmen all collapse. That confirmed his intuition. In the underworld, he also knew some people like this. Monstrous people who completely defied normality even though there were actual monsters above ground now. The blonde guy warned the boss to be careful, saying the kid was stronger than he looked, but he took an elbow to the face. The boss said he didn't like being called incompetent. What he wanted to deal with was that boy. He approached, saying the boy had a very rebellious eye, and now he would find out who was in charge here. Maybe now he could see whatever was inside the boy's soul. He wanted to see the true form. He found himself in front of a wall and opened it with his hands, but all he saw was darkness. That's when he realized he was wrong. It wasn't he who was looking at the boy, but the opposite. Seeing himself about to be devoured, the boss screamed and fell back. The others asked what happened to him, and the protagonist just stood there, staring at everyone. The boss was certain he had almost been killed. The people in the room couldn't understand, and the girl behind the boss was questioning why he was acting that way in front of a child. Then they heard a scream. A man appeared at the door, asking for help, saying he couldn't see. They saw he was covered in blood and asked what happened. The man said he had had a strange headache for a while, and now something was coming out of his head. One of them asked if that was a monster. The man said there was something in his head that didn't want to come out. Suddenly, he twisted and then stood up again. The people stood frozen, watching. Something came out of his eye and shot across the room. The boss immediately yelled that it was a monster and punched him in the face, throwing him to the other side. The man was about to get up when the boss grabbed a tool and cut the creature. It fell next to the body and he finished it off. The people relaxed, saying that now it had stopped moving, the boss had killed it. The boss was wondering where that monster had come from. The people relaxed, saying they thought they were going to die just now. But something was wrong. They were celebrating being saved by the boss, but the protagonist noticed something. His expression changed and the boss turned around. At that moment, a creature appeared, and the door was slammed shut. No one could move, and the monster rose up. Perhaps it was because they had spent too much time underground. Everyone there had already forgotten, or rather they were trying to forget, the terrible memories of what they would have to face. At that moment, people dropped their bats, turned around, and started running desperately. However, the boss asked how long they would keep running and if they would repeat this forever. Pointing his axe, he said that this was only one monster and it was different from before. Together, they could defeat it. Maybe it was because they had just seen one of the monsters get killed, or maybe the boss's words had motivated them. Everyone started to feel confident, saying that maybe they really could do it. After all, if they left this place, they would have nowhere to run. They picked up their bats again and said they were going to kill that monster. The people were still hesitant, but the monsters were no longer a reason for fear. For the first time since the monsters appeared, they felt something different. A girl looked to the side and asked the boss for an order. They felt hope, but the boss was killed by the creature from behind. His body was lifted and everyone was confused because they had cut it into 1,000 pieces. The creature dropped his body and a girl in a suit said it was impossible for it to come back to life. Everyone came to the same conclusion and the boss said it was impossible to win against it. With that, the subway wall was destroyed and the monsters advanced. The poor chubby man didn't even react. The girl couldn't do anything as the monster approached, and the blonde man lost an arm. The monster grabbed her and gave a crushing hug. The room was painted red and everyone was fleeing desperately. From the corner, the protagonist was just observing. The people in the room hearing the screams said it was only a matter of time before everyone died. The man with glasses was remembering the girl. However, the doctor grabbed his arm and asked where he was going. He turned around saying his child was there and he had to find her. The doctor said obviously if the monsters were there, she was already dead. The man didn't want to believe that this had happened again, until someone passed by him. He looked to see who it was and saw the protagonist's back. Everyone was impressed and the doctor ran, telling him not to do it. However, the boy just kept moving forward. From the room, everyone watched the red room. The boy just prepared himself. In another place, Haru, the little girl, and the man were hiding. She started crying and Haru told her to stay quiet. Haru thought she didn't have time to care about anyone else. She can there amidst the chaos but would die as soon as they were found. However, the little girl was just holding onto her arm, trembling. Haru looked back and, not knowing what to say, just told the girl to stick close. The blonde man, seeing his dead wife, was terrified and asked where they thought they were going. Haru said they had to flee, but he asked where to. Haru replied that she didn't know where, but they couldn't stay there. The man continued, saying there were monsters here and on the surface. Why did she think they could find a way to survive? She responded that even so, she wouldn't wait for death to come. She would do everything possible to survive, no matter what. The man then said that in her eyes, he could see she still had a reason to live. But then she looked to the side and saw a monster staring at the three of them. He was shocked and told them to run. However, Haru was paralyzed and her leg was trembling. The man hugged the creature and told them to run, saying he had no reason to live anymore. But when he looked to the side, no one was there. The two girls were already running. He muttered that they could have at least waited for his speech. With that, he started screaming, while on the other side, people were hacking at the creature with axes. The rest of the group was lying on the ground. The girl in the suit attacked the creature, but its wounds regenerated instantly. The monster lifted the man, and she fell against the wall, certain it was impossible to win. But the protagonist walked past her. Everyone was wondering what he was thinking of doing and where he was going. The plant monster was still killing everyone using the boss's body. The girl on the ground wondered if he was really going to face it. Seeing the creature, she knew it was like asking to die, since even the boss had no chance. The protagonist calmly observed the attack. When the tentacles approached, he dodged and advanced. He grabbed the sides and pulled the monster while throwing himself forward. The monster tried to hit the back of his neck, but he jumped off the wall backward and landed on the other side, creating a knot between them. He looked at the man who commanded the monsters to attack, but since the creature was tied up, it couldn't reach him anymore. His movements had caused the monster to get tangled up in itself. Calmly, he approached the boss and tore the creature off him. The doctor couldn't believe he had stopped the monster. The girl said it didn't matter because the boss was still alive. With that, the monster screamed and the others turned to it. He threw the creature to the ground and the giant advanced. As the monster came to bite him, he jumped and met it in the chin, then slid under its arms. The other creature opened its belly to eat him. However, he just jumped, dodging the attack, and landed on its back. He pulled out the axe he had earlier, but the creature sprayed blood in his face. It then went for an elbow strike that landed solidly. The people were shocked, but the protagonist was still alive. The doctor had no idea how that was possible. To them, this creature had immense strength and the ability to regenerate. Fighting it was basically suicide. Yet that boy in front of them was standing and fighting alone. The protagonist remembered his father's words. There is no being in this world that doesn't die. Everything that exists needs a source. That's how life begins, and that's what must be cut off. His father always believed that if it were him fighting the monsters, he would know exactly where the life of each one resided and, more importantly, how to destroy their cores. The monsters attacked and he dodged them both. He knew exactly where the life of each one resided and, more importantly, how to destroy their cores. He struck directly at the creature's core, and the attack hit the nucleus. The creature started to disintegrate, its form breaking down as it lost its strength and life. It began to dissolve, forming